talk with each other and really try to build connections between energy committee members in this virtual space. So for folks who don't know me, my name is Ian Hitchcock. I'm organizer with the Vermont Natural Resources Council, and together with my colleagues Becca Custer and Johanna Miller, I help to organize and run the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network. We are thrilled to see so many fantastic faces here and are really happy to talk about a topic that is of great importance to Vermont's climate actions going forward, and that, of course, is transportation. Joey's going to tee up and introduce our first presenter, Robb Kidd from the Sierra Club. Joey?
Thanks, Ian. So nice to see everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm Johanna Miller, as Ian mentioned, Joey from Vermont Natural Resources Council. So yeah, we really wanted to sort of, be in more regular contact with you all and focus in on transportation. And we have asked our friend and colleague at the Sierra Club, Robb Kidd, who has been knee deep in following the Transportation Modernization Act in the virtual legislative session this year. The Transportation Modernization Act, you're going to learn a lot more about that from Robb, but what we why we thought it would be great to highlight for you all and then after the presentation have a dialogue about is it's really sort of taking the existing annual transportation bill and budget and reappropriating existing dollars to expand many important programs that are providing cleaner, more affordable, diverse transportation options and strategies to get Vermonters where they need to go. So it's a really important initiative, and we're going to focus on the programs, of the wide array of programs that are embedded in the Transportation Modernization Act that at the local level, leaders like you and municipalities and other Vermonters, I think, will be really important players in helping to sort of implement and lift up programs that are envisioned in the Transportation Modernization Act, including things like the Mileage Smart program now being run under Capstone Community Action, which really helps people of lower income Vermonters access more fuel efficient vehicles, for example. So there's a lot to unpack, and I'm appreciative of Robb's time and everyone's time here today to dig in to that bill and more so into the kinds of programs and which are essentially just an example of the kind of transportation and system and vision that we want to co-create here together. So Robb, take it away. Tell us about the TMA.
And just very quickly, Robb, as you're getting started and set up here, I just want to, on a logistical note, let folks know that we will have a little bit of time for questions at the end, but really want to try to save a lot of time for the dialogue between all of y'all. So feel free to put your questions in the chat as Robb is going through his presentation. We'll try to get to some of them, but those we don't get to, we'll try to make sure that we can get to Robb via email or respond to in other ways. But want to make sure that we keep presentations moving along. So with that, take it away, Robb.
So good. Well, you referenced that anybody has any questions following this, make sure you email me. It's my email address right there, Robb with 2b's.kidd@sierraclub.org, and I'll answer any question afterwards. So basically, we're going to talk about the Transportation Modernization Act, H94, and the way it interacts with the 2021 transportation budget. But I just want to step back quickly. Is basically a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago, the Sierra Club local to Vermont chapter decided we should work on transportation issues, basically because nearly 50% of our climate pollution comes from transportation. And also because a lot of Vermonters spend a lot of their time driving and spending their energy dollars on transportation, it was a way we can impact our emissions targets right off the bat. So a lot of people were never really totally focused on transportation as a climate thing, even though we all know with our vehicles, that's where we're contributing to it. So just to set the stage back for those who are following closely, you all know that back in September, the legislature overrode Governor Scott's veto of the Global Warming Solutions Act, and it's created a climate council that is charged with developing a climate plan. We have some great members on that, including Joey Miller on that. And hopefully the Climate Action Council is going to create more things we can do to address our climate emissions. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't think of the ideas or work on it now, because we need to reduce our climate emissions now to and not wait ahead. I also just want to put on a note on here, the Transportation Climate Initiative is operating. We've been participating in the discussions, but we're not joined on yet. But that's a possible future way to go to finding some more revenue to fight carbon emissions. Hopefully the Climate Council will look into things a little bit more. The Sierra Club, we've been a little bit cautious on it because we want to make sure whatever final participation we get involved with is very equitable. So regarding to that, I wanted to start off with H94, the Transportation Modernization Act. First off, you have to give a huge shout out to Representative Kurt McCormick, who was the chair of the Transportation Committee up until this last year.
Are you frozen?
To the legislative, he was the chair of the House Transportation Committee and is no longer, because he actually stepped down for different health reasons, but he is on the actual committee still. But then also Representative Rebecca White, Molly Burke, Gabrielle Stebbins, who's a new member on the committee, and John Bartholomew. They're the lead sponsors of this particular bill. And they basically got out ahead of what the governor was proposing. But I just want to give you an idea of what the kind of concepts were thought about. Early on in October, Kurt McCormick with these legislators introduced a platform of things that they want to accomplish. And basically the biggest goal is a state with a majority of electric vehicles. Many of you here are probably familiar with the Energy Action Network, and the Energy Action Network stated that 90% of our, we need 90,000 electric vehicles by 2025 in order to reach our goals of the Paris Climate Accords. The state had been sitting there coming in and testifying, saying we only needed 50,000. But now the Global Warming Solutions Act is in place. We're clearly saying we need 90,000 electric vehicles. But some of the ideas that were in here, which is that, we needed to push for transit buses. We needed to make sure employers of 50 more have prior electric charging vehicle settings. Then even updating the building codes. So that was kind of the emphasis around the concept. It was pushing for majority of electric vehicles first, but then going into other policies as well, including transportation demand management, increasing public transit, including the phenomenal program of the microtransit program that they're doing here in Montpelier, the My Ride, and created by Sustainable Montpelier Group. All these different ideas need to be implemented, even talking about bicycle corridor priorities, roundabout developments, and serious complete streets programs. But a lot of these things are going to be down into what you are all doing in the town committees and the energy committees. And if your town has a transportation committee, it's not just necessarily going to be the agency of transportation. So I'm going to get into that in a moment. So, but I want to also step back here, is in the legislature, the House and Senate transportation committees in most years only pass one or two comprehensive bills. First is the transportation bill, which starts in the House based upon the governor's budget recommendations. You'll also, if you ever follow the committee, they'll also hear a terminology called the White Book, where all projects of the state are put together into this big book that lists whatever project the agency of transportation is doing. The committee will look into that and then propose their particular language. So in a difference of some other years, this particular bill, the Transportation Modernization Act, was kind of more of a, let's get out in front of the governor. Let's propose our ideas. Let's talk about the ideas about that we want to see implemented. In other years, the the Transportation Committee will have to talk about issues for a while, and they'll be able to maybe nickel and dime the governor's budget and get maybe $500,000 for a program, maybe get 25,000 or something. So it's hard. So the idea of what we did, what Senator Representative Kurt McCormick and his colleagues did, was get it in front of the budget bill this year. Not also to confuse people, generally they also passed the miscellaneous DMV bill, which starts off generally in the Senate as well, but there's no requirement for that bill to pass. So anything that's going to pass through the Transportation Committee will come through the transportation bill. So it's known as one of those must-pass bill. So anything that's around transportation will go through the transportation bill that committee members think is a priority. But I want to just kind of show you in here quickly the difference of some funding protocols that the governor's transportation budget and the differences with H94. If you see right on my line item, the new PEV program is the program that's administered by Drive Electric Vermont to incentivize electric vehicles. In H94, we were asking for $3.8 million towards that program. The governor asked for $2 million. So we look at that as a victory that the governor is asking for $2 million for that. But then there's $250,000 from the governor asking to give Drive Electric to minister the programs and minister EV awareness programs, while H94 only 200,000. Then for those of you who know, I'm not going to go into the details of the different programs, but there's also the Replace Your Ride program, which is a brand new program which was launched. The concept was launched at the Energy Action Network Summit this last fall. And I guess they did a really good job convincing the governor and the administration about it, and convincing legislators, because even though it's a brand new program, the governor asked for 1.5 million, while in H94, $1 million. The Mileage Smart program, which is a different program, which allows for used EVs and used hybrids to get into low income folks' ownership, and that's administered from the capstone in Barrie. They have some money left over from the program year. So the governor originally was not proposing any money for that, but according to the capstone, they need at least another $600,000 to operate this, because their funds will be depleted by the middle of the year. And then you can see the other things. They put in $1 million for charging, the H94, 500,000. But I want to also this is brand new, and I don't have the details. I threw in there fare free transit. Originally, the governor's budget did not have money for the fare free transit program. And we were told last week that the governor is now supporting that. So we're not really sure where that money is and exactly how much money they're contributing, or if it's coming from a federal grant program. So I want to kind of notice what that program is. But in all of Vermont, it costs about $2.2 million for Chittenden County to operate fare free transit, and the rest of Vermont is $500,000. So, and a lot of people always wonder about the equity concerns about fare free transit. It just makes it so much easier for those who don't have any money to just get on a bus whenever it's convenient. And it's just one of those programs that a lot of people think is a good way to increase ridership, making it easier. And then I threw in here also on this is MTI, and that's a grant program that was created last year, thanks really to retiring Senator Tim Ash. And it was a program to give communities access to alternative ideas, such as the microtransit program, or even I know Capstone put in for about creating a rural Uber program, or a transportation demand management program. The H94 proposes $1.2 million. The governor right now hasn't consider that as a priority, but it's something that you all maybe will able to think about. But I want to notice on here that you actually see on there that the total transportation budget is almost $700 million. So that's just some of these climate investments are real pennies of our budget. They're not really a lot of money. We're trying to get more and more money to get the transportation budget in line with our climate values. So if you look at that, I want to also note on this particular conversation, electric bus transition, there was some wording in the original H94 that asked for mandates for electric buses, but in response, the governor did propose replacing 7 internal combustion engines for $3.7 million. Those were buses that were already scheduled to be replaced. And they're now proposing a transportation electrification plan that will follow by next year to actually get us in the path of how we can electrify all those little buses that operate in communities, how we're going to get the bigger buses, and all these different actions that are needed for maintenance and training. And so we're just not going to throw out buses. So there's a lot of really good work on it. And I'm going to praise the public transit manager, Ross McDonald. For those of you who know him, I think he's doing a great job of managing that program. But we're moving along pretty well for that. Then just some other areas, just a note in there. The governor proposed $5.5 million for the Downtown Transportation Fund. It's a match program. And just kind of to get this into, the Downtown Transportation Fund was only for those for communities that are recognized as official downtowns. So Chittenden County is excluded from that particular makeup. But the governor is also proposing within his push for that extra money for those communities that were involved with the Better Connection program could participate into it. And the Better Connection program, if you're a town, is more of a planning document, a planning agent. So that's something else. There's some money in this budget for Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, rail projects, and paving, which I'm not sure the total number of paving, but paving includes bike corridors and expanding that. So when they pave a road, they're going to expand some of their high bike corridors. So even though I'm not happy with the overall increase in paving, there's going to be some areas that they're going to increase the paving overall where a lot of people are biking. And just also, I also do not list every little area of the transportation budget. The transportation budget is, like I was starting to say, is a huge project-based thing. I had worked with the Transportation Committee back in 2008, the Legislative Council. And in that year, when I was at Legislative Council, I never heard the words climate referenced. So we've gone a long way in changing this, where now we're looking at the climate priorities within the budgeting. So I think it's a lot of credit to all the other work that's happening in the communities. Even last year with Kurt McCormick as the chair, he's pushed the envelope on a lot of things. Former Speaker Mitzi Johnson had the guts to promote Kurt as the chair and create what we call a primary climate leadership on the Transportation Committee. So there's been a lot of work to move forward on these particular areas. But as this conversation is geared towards the towns and energy committees, I just wanted to kind of point out the opportunities that there are there for this, for all you to kind of hear about, and not just talk to you about what's in the bill, because there's a lot more, but EVSE grants to investing in electric vehicle infrastructure. One of the things we see is very important is downtown charging, multifamily dwellings, places of businesses. That could be a big push into helping us accelerate charging. 90% of electric vehicles charge at home, but one of the fears that people have about electric vehicles is range anxiety. So the more we have electric vehicle charging facilities in a downtown, the more people can access it in a place of business, and particularly multifamily dwellings is really important, because multifamily dwellings is where people who are lower incomes who would benefit really well of having electric vehicle. I already referenced the mobility and transportation innovation grants. That's something like that was originally in H94, but it's not in the governor's budget. So, but that's an area that we can kind of push. You could push your legislator into saying, I would really like my community to be able to access some funds like that. There's the Downtown Transportation Fund, which I just started to talk about ahead. But the Downtown Transportation Fund is a lot more of a kind of a streetscaping project. It's not necessarily for EV charging, but that's one of those things that, you know, if the governor is putting 5.5 million towards that, maybe we can put another million to downtown charging. You can think about ideas about how to make it more pedestrian friendly, another bike path, another parklet, things like that, that are going to better your general community. I also threw here the Better Places as another grant program that is not in the transportation budget, but it's in the general fund budget. The transportation alternatives is more of a federal aid project. And then another really important thing that we're being kind of charged with, and it's currently not in any of our legislation around transportation issue, is a lot more community engagement. We're going to be trying to talk with transportation leaders about some equity and racial justice values within the transportation bill, but that's where your participation in your communities can be really helpful to kind of talk to people about what they particularly need. Myself, I live in Montpelier, and I walk to town all day. But you know, I don't hear from some of those people who are low income, who rely on their little bus that takes them to the hospital. You know, we need to hear the people who are dependent on these things, who don't have the luxuries to take of walking, or healthy like myself, or biking, or like things like that. How can these programs help our general community members? So I want everybody to consider those particular things. And so I just want to talk quickly what's next on this. The Transportation Committee is continuing to debate these components of this bill. And I am not sure the exact date, but I think it's by March 20th, is they're going to have to vote that bill out of the committee and eventually approve to the House, where then it will, after it votes out of the House Transportation Committee, it will go to the Senate. So this is really an important time frame for you all to connect with your legislators and say that you wanted some of these programs addressed. You know, if you really want to see more money invested towards downtown charging facilities, if you want to see more alternative funding, this is going to be a critical time to get that support. I even heard one particular representative, I'm not going to say their name because I contacted some members in their district, that said that none of their constituents cares about electric vehicles. And I was kind of like, what? And I found 3 members of the Sierra Club who actually do have electric vehicles. So I immediately had them contact them. Some of the other committee members are just like, oh, they're like, you know, trying to find the best solutions, and they would need to hear from you. And as you all, as town committee leaders and energy committee leaders, this is going to be the really important type of time frame to talk with them. And as well, I told you about the miscellaneous DMV bill earlier on my earlier slide. That will pass out of the committee as well, and then it'll eventually come to the House. And so other areas that may have been addressed may add into these particular bills along the way. Particularly, there's talk about electric vehicle user fee. For those who don't understand, is most of our transportation dollars come from the gas tax, and electric vehicles currently don't pay any. but as electric vehicles is only 1% of our total fleet, they're not really making a difference, but there's a push to change that. Agency of Transportation years ago under, I think, Gina Campoli put a great report that basically said it wasn't worth us to do that until 15% of our electric vehicles, 15% of our fleet are electric vehicles. So we want to make sure we're not rushing into giving punitive fees on electric vehicles. There's also a talk about electric vehicle charging rate design. So those of you who belong to Green Mountain Power already have that a special rate for electric vehicles, where they give you a rate price break, so then you charge at a better in the evening when not as many vehicles are being charged and not as much power is being used. And then there's also a direct sales service center bill. Senator Andy Perchlik has introduced that S47 that would allow those who have a Tesla to get their cars serviced here in Vermont. And there's a lot of questions about that actually a lot of people don't realize is that will actually help with our used marketplace, because right now, if people can't service a Tesla, the used Teslas are going out of state. So it's something that could be really helpful. And then, of course, I said racial justice and equity will be talked about later. So I just threw on the chart here the House Transportation Committee members. This, what I said, is very important. If you belong to in any of those members are your representative, please contact them and tell them that you want to support these areas that you're most interested in. The chair, Diane Lanfer, is not signed on to the bill because generally that's the way the chair doesn't normally sign on to particular legislations. But on H94, John Bartholomew, Molly Burke, Kurt McCormick, and Gabrielle Stebbins and Rebecca White are all co-sponsors of H94. That means the other committee members are, we're not really sure where they're going to stand when it comes down to supporting H94 and the governor's budget. So it's going to be very helpful. As well, if your member is not on the Transportation Committee, you could still contact them, but I would recommend you contacting one of the committee members who lives near your district, because you're a town energy committee leader, and you need to influence what's going on in the Transportation Committee. So pick one of those committee members who live near you to contact and to message about this. And then, as I told you, the Senate will be taking this bill up after a couple weeks after town meeting day. So once it gets into the Senate, then you can contact the Senate Transportation Committee members, but I didn't list them here just for ease. So that is basically it for the short presentation. I normally don't like doing these slide presentations, but as a courtesy for my friends at the VNRC, I purposely created this one. And I want to apologize for the one little image there. I show a circle, the circle that has a car on it on a leaf. I had somebody designing new images, and she has not completed the one I requested because I asked her to include a bus and somebody walking and somebody bicycling. We also have to get out of this idea of individual cars. So I think when we think of clean transportation for all, it's all the above, not just for the individual single-use occupancy vehicle. And so there's my contact info. And if anybody has any questions, I'll try to answer now. I'm not sure how much time we have for it right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Rob. Really great overview. I will say, as often happens with these sorts of things, the time is just flying by. And so I think what I will have us do to try to preserve as much breakout time as possible is I will save the chat and the great questions folks have been posting. We'll get those emailed to Rob, and maybe we can include some just follow-up answers to those questions in the follow-up email that we send from this webinar. If that works for you, Rob, we'd love to do it that way. Things rolling here. Just a few quick points I would want to highlight from that awesome presentation is when we say over and over and over again, like elections matter, this is what we mean. It has been really astonishing for me to see such a rapid transition from a transportation bill and a transportation committee that has normally been focused, as Rob said, on paving, on roads and bridges, and just kind of the way we always have done things. And to see everything that Rob articulated and many more of the things that he didn't be held up and coming forward as real climate solutions embedded within this bill that where they haven't been is exactly the sort of thing we need to see. It's a credit to Rob's leadership as an advocate, to the leadership of Representative McCormick, to folks like Representative Becca White, who I know is on this call, and is part of why we are so interested in engaging with all of you on policy, because ultimately the kinds of amazing programs that you all need to do and want to do on the local level are often enabled, and as Joey often says, helped or hindered by good and supportive public policy, which is why we wanted to flag this bill for you all in particular and dive into it in a little more depth. Now, at this point, I would like to turn things over to Steve Bauer of the Richmond Energy Committee, and we're going to give him a couple of minutes to talk about the experience that Richmond had in applying for an electric vehicle charging grant, receiving it, and how that process has gone forward, with the thinking that that's the kind of program that could be supported and currently is embedded in the language of the bill, and could be expanded if this bill were to pass, which is another reason why it's important at the right time. So we'll try to let you know when those are, to let your reps know how important it is to pass. Steve.
Hey, how's my volume?
You sound great to me.
All right. So this will be a pretty quick overview. I think Ian wants to make up some time, but Ian's going to put my email in the chat window. So anybody should feel free to contact me if you have any questions about our experience. Getting an electric vehicle charging station put in Richmond, publicly available. And this project came out of the state EVSE, Electric Vehicle Supply Equipment Grant Program, easily found online for anybody who's not familiar with it. And that program previously supported level 2 chargers, but now their focus is on level 3 or DC fast charging stations. And my understanding from their website is that the legislature appropriated $750,000 to continue building out the network of DC fast charge stations, and that they expect to put out a request for proposals this spring, but with an expectation to award it to a single bidder. So their focus is on that infrastructure. Whereas in Richmond, we put in a level 2 charging station, and so that's what I'll be speaking to. And obviously, either through this bill or other funding opportunities, there are other ways to raise money to put in a charging station. So we put in a charge point station. Those cost on the order of $7,000 to $8,000 just for the hardware. But there are cheaper units that can be considered for smaller projects like what we did in Richmond. So 3 main project considerations I think people should take into mind is funding and building support for the project and speccing out the project. Those typically take place in parallel, but that's what I'm going to speak to, and mostly to speccing out the project and the kind of things that we had to deal with at the town level. So funding wise, it's like any other grant, identifying your funding sources, whether that's the town or doing your own fundraising. I won't speak to that. Building support for the project, like any grant, but I think maybe more than some grants, it's really good to identify all your stakeholders early on, your town boards, the select board, planning commission, any business associations, anyone who might be a stakeholder where you propose to locate the charging station, and engage with them early on. Find out who's friendly to the project and who might not be because of parking issues, reserving spaces for EVs, or anyone who feels like towns shouldn't be in the business of supporting building this kind of infrastructure or whatever. Those concerns can usually be addressed, but you want to get them out on the table early on and build support for the project. So, and then the third main project consideration would be speccing out the project, and that's what I'll speak mainly to. First, obviously, you got to decide what kind of charging station you're interested in installing. Typically, that'd be a level 2 charger for smaller town projects, since level 3s are possibilities, but they do require much more expensive, bigger power supply and and they're more expensive. That's pretty easily researched online because these chargers are readily available through regular outlets. Another big decision point is whether you want to put in an internet-enabled charging station like a ChargePoint or a SemaConnect that will enable drivers to check the station on their phone or on their app, on their tablet, see if it's in use, and will enable automated payment. Typically just by swiping card in front of the charge unit and such. If it's not internet enabled, then users would typically be charged, either letting them charge for free or pay by donation. There are options there. There are towns who have done that. Plainfield is an example, but that's a main consideration. Obviously, how many parking spaces or charging heads you want to put in that you think you want to support. I mentioned that mainly if you're putting in 2 parking spaces like we did, 2 heads, you may want to consider laying some extra conduit at the time you're connecting to a power source so that you can expand in the future, which Richmond did, so we could expand to a couple more spaces if the demand is high enough. Now, where you're going to locate it is really one of the hardest decisions. One thing to really put some thought into, you need to get to a power supply. For a dual head level 2 charging station, you need 240 volt power, and you need a 40 amp circuit. Ideally, you can plug into an existing, for a town type project, you can plug into an existing power source, a circuit box somewhere without having to put in a new account. But you'll need to think about what you have for power supply. Power poles with transformers are often a possibility. You can call your power company to check with them. Green Mountain Power is very helpful with me when we considered a site that would have just pulled power down from a transformer. You may be able to tap into a street light, but you have to make sure that it can support the power that you need. So those are considerations. Consider access to businesses and attractions. Obviously, the closer you can put it to where people want to eat and shop and go to attractions, the better. If it's too far out of the way, people are less likely to use it. Parking is, for some communities, going to be a big issue because if parking is at a premium already, in Richmond's downtown village, that was the case. So you want to locate it where it's going to have a minimal impact and where people won't have that concern that you are taking spaces away from other people. So that's an issue to plan for up front. We made the case that the number of EVs is growing rapidly, the need to build the infrastructure to encourage EV ownership, that this was part of the transformation. And we proposed location that was pretty close to the village center, but not in the highest use parking area. And those, I think, were good decisions. And snow plowing, make sure whoever's going to be doing the snow plowing is on board, because that can be tricky in many public spaces. Just a couple more items. One is you have to decide what you're going to charge. We opted to just charge the cost of electricity, which is now legal in Vermont, and plus charge points, 10% adder comes out to 19 cents a kilowatt hour. And then, of course, you might have dwelling fees that go up after 2 or 3 or 4 hours to keep you from sitting there too long. But I do think that you don't need to, I don't think there would be a big benefit to giving the power away for free. Most EV owners, that's not going to be a disincentive to them using the charging station for the cost of electricity. And then you don't have people in town arguing that the town shouldn't be doing that kind of subsidy, which is often going to people in higher income brackets at this point until EVs get cheaper. So think about the maintenance. Were you breaking in there? Somebody?
Just a little bit, Steve. I was wondering, just knowing that the clock is ticking, would you be able to give just a quick overview of kind of what the process of applying for the grant itself was like for you and your committee? I think that might be a good step where we hope people would be next. And it'd be great to hear from kind of your experience about that aspect of the project.
Sure. And I actually had just finished up the other part of my notes, other than think about signage and publicity and how you'll publicize it and get it out in your local channels. I think the grant was a pretty typical project for the EVSE program. There was a pretty rigorous application that we originally put in 2018. We didn't get selected because we didn't technically meet all of the requirements for this particular grant with the EVSE grant program. And but as I was saying, to reach out to stakeholders, the same thing's true of whoever the contact person is for the grant. And so we reached out pretty early on to the person who was the contact person for the state to say, hey, we're interested. What do you think about a project here? In my experience, the person who's the contact person often is on the selection committee. And it's not a bad idea to be friendly with them, to let them know who you are, that you're enthusiastic about it. So that's one angle. And I think at every opportunity within the grant application, this was a very structured form that needed to be filled out, but every opportunity to show that we were enthusiastic, that we thought this would be important to the town and to the state, and that we were a good location to put it, we just put all of our best feet forward in those types of situations. So just to keep it quick, if you don't get picked in round one and there's a round two, you are then better situated to get picked in round two. That was the experience for us. And to reach out to those who are putting the grant out there, to let them, feel your enthusiasm, I think is important, as it is with any grant process. And as well, making sure that there's a bit of risk here, that you put in a grant for a specific amount of money, where for a town like Richmond, we want to make sure that the town, which has to pay a match, doesn't end up having to pay more because we underestimated the project. But you also don't want to overestimate the project and reduce your chance of being selected. So that's a balance, as for any grant of this type. I think we got bids when the town went out to bid. We got bids that were twice as much as what we had spec'd the project at. But fortunately, we also got a bid that came in just below what we had spec'd the project at. So it was successful that way. But that's another balance to keep in mind as you prepare a grant like this. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that overview, Steve.
I assume Ian posted my email. Feel free to contact me, and thanks for including me.
Absolutely. Clearly, Steve is a wealth of information and knowledge about all levels, nuts and bolts of how to get these things going. And so if and when your communities are able to access that, I hope that folks will take advantage of his time and expertise. A big goal of ours with these kinds of events is to just try to make it easier for all of y'all to know and understand just how much expertise there is out there in not just transportation, but a wide variety of areas, and hoping to elevate folks that have that experience. So we've got less time for breakouts than I wanted. That's okay. We had some guiding questions. We have cut it down to one. And so what I'm going to do now is I will quickly create about 8 breakout rooms, should be 5 to 6 folks in each room. And rather than have folks kind of go around and introduce themselves, I would ask folks to just kind of dive right into the guiding question that my colleague Becca Custer will put in the chat right now, as well as expect to see, Joey, myself, and Becca popping in and out of breakouts, doing what we can to make sure that conversations are going well and good connections are being made. But we know we've given you all a lot of food for thought, and so our question is, based on what you've heard, what kinds of transportation projects do you think could be most helpful for your community, and what challenge could you anticipate in trying to make them a reality? Hope that gives you all some food for thought. We would ask if there is one person in each breakout, who'd be willing to take notes of just the key points that come out. We'd love to collect those and be able to kind of use them to get a better sense, particularly on like challenges and opportunities, so we know what sorts of supports we can try to provide or resources to try to connect you all with as you go to move forward. And the other thing I'll note, so knowing the event is scheduled to end at 1, but it's gone a little bit longer. Folks should, of course, peel out whenever they need to, but we're going to leave the breakout rooms open until at least 1:15. So if your conversation's going well past 1, please feel free to continue it at least until that point. And we won't be reconvening again, so feel free to just kind of disperse when the conversation is done. And thank you guys so much for being here, and we'll be sending around follow-up materials and whatnot. In the meantime, enjoy your breakouts.
What's the size groups you made?
So again, knowing we're short on time, I did 4 to 5.
Oh, never mind. Sorry. Okay, because there's only one in mine, and I'm gonna.
I'm gonna bump Wes into room 3.
Okay, that would be helpful. Okay,
Done. And then let's see. Looks like we've still got some folks here. Richard and Jim, if you guys are able to hear me, you all should have invitations to breakout rooms on your screen. Are you able to see them and click join? My guess is they are, as gamer lingo is, AFK, away from keyboard. Oh, there we go. There goes one. We've got, so room 4, just the one that you're in, only has 1. I'm going to make you a co-host now, Becca. I didn't do it when Rob was presenting just because I wanted to make sure that we didn't,
I'm also realizing we probably don't need to be recording anymore, but we can.
Oh yeah, let's turn that off. I will stop that right now.